She was accused of dividing a family, blamed for being too sensitive, labeled dramatic, ungrateful, and difficult. But when she walked into my office for the first time, her hands weren't trembling out of guilt. They were trembling from years of being silenced. I'm attorney Claire Morgan, and this is the story of how a quiet young woman named Riley Bennett was slowly crushed under the weight of manipulative in-laws until one hidden recording changed everything. If you're someone who believes in true legal stories and wants to understand the signs of emotional abuse behind closed doors, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay with me all the way to the end. What looks like a normal family issue might be the red flag someone close to you is living with right now. The day Riley's life began to unravel, nothing dramatic was happening on the surface. It was an ordinary weekday. Rain tapping the windows, cars humming outside my office, and a girl sitting across from me with a composure so fragile it felt like the wrong word could shatter her. Her hair was tied back too tightly, her blouse neatly tucked, her posture straight like someone trying desperately to look fine. Women like her spend years making sure they never give anyone a reason to call them difficult. When she finally spoke, her voice was level, almost practiced, like she had replayed this story 100 times alone but never dared to say it aloud. She introduced herself, married for 3 years, no children yet. Living with her husband, Ethan, in his parents' home, a 2-story suburban house owned by his mother Margaret, father Charles, and sister Madison. On paper, it looked like a normal American family household. But nothing about Riley's eyes looked normal. They looked like someone who was constantly watched. And that's the truth most people don't understand. Manipulative homes rarely begin with cruelty. They begin with rules. Unwritten, implied rules. Riley's story began the same way. She met Ethan through mutual friends. He seemed kind, soft-spoken, thoughtful, someone who praised her independence. He told her he admired women who worked, said he respected her job as a teaching assistant, and promised marriage wouldn't hold her back. Promises are easy over coffee and first dates. Living them under the influence of a controlling family is something else entirely. After their wedding, moving into his family's home felt temporary, just until we save up, Ethan had said. But temporary housing can turn into permanent control. The Bennett's home looked perfect from the outside. Freshly painted siding, flower beds trimmed, a porch swing that suggested family warmth. But the real structure of that home wasn't wood and nails, it was control. Invisible, silent, and suffocating. The rules began that very first week. Margaret, polite, elegant, and sharp as glass, never raised her voice. She wrapped every criticism in concern. If Riley woke up at 7, Margaret would casually mention how, in this house, we start our day early. If Riley cooked, Margaret would smile, then rearrange every dish she touched. A silent message, nothing you do meets our standard. Not once did they yell, that's the brilliance of manipulation. It looks like guidance to outsiders. It feels like failure to the person living in it. Margaret's daughter, Madison, played the role of the sweet but needy sister-in-law. She'd tell Riley stories about how close-knit their family was, how they hated when outsiders changed their dynamics. Technically, Riley was now family. But in their language, she remained an outsider until she molded herself into their exact expectations. The phone rules came next. At first, Margaret would simply ask, "Who were you talking to?" Or, "Everything okay at your parents' place?" It sounded harmless, almost caring. Later it became, "Your mom calls a lot. Don't let your old life interfere with your new one. You should focus on your husband now." Riley began shortening her calls, then she began taking them outside on the porch. Then she stopped calling every day altogether. When she told me this, she stared at the desk and whispered, "I thought maybe this was normal. Maybe all daughters-in-law go through this." That sentence broke something inside me because that's exactly how emotional abuse works. It convinces the victim that cruelty is culture, that silence is respect, that control is care. Money was the next battlefield. Before marriage, Riley had a small job, not high-paying, but it gave her independence. Ethan encouraged it before they married. But inside the Bennett home, promises held no weight against Margaret's influence. Whenever Riley mentioned continuing her job, Margaret sighed dramatically. Charles talked about how a good wife prioritizes family. Madison said she felt abandoned when Riley wasn't home. Ethan didn't yell or forbid anything. He simply said, "Maybe not right now. Maybe after we settle." After we settle is the most effective trap in manipulative households. It's a date that never arrives. Slowly, Riley stopped working. Her bank account quieted. Her dependence grew. That's when the monitoring intensified. Margaret began tracking every grocery item. If Riley needed anything personal, makeup, a sweater, shampoo, she had to ask. And every request came with a lecture about spending, responsibility, and gratitude. But manipulation doesn't stop at controlling what you do. It controls who you believe you are. She was called too emotional if she cried, inattentive if she rested, ungrateful if she asked for space, dramatic if she expressed hurt. Over time, she stopped trusting her own reactions. She began wondering if she really was the problem. The turning point came almost 2 years into the marriage. Her parents invited her for a short visit, just a weekend. Riley hesitated but mentioned it at dinner. The air changed instantly. Margaret's smile disappeared. Charles went cold. Madison acted wounded. Ethan avoided her eyes. Not a single person shouted. But every comment was a reminder that leaving the house meant she was choosing someone else over them. By the end of dinner, Riley was the one apologizing for even asking. When she finally visited her parents for only one night, they noticed the difference: her weight loss, her forced smile, how she kept checking her phone like she was afraid of missing something, how she spoke like she was being monitored even in their home. But they didn't push. No one wants to be accused of ruining a marriage. Back at the Bennett house, the manipulation escalated. Now they began shaping how Ethan saw her. They mocked her cooking in front of him. They exaggerated her mistakes. They painted her as overly sensitive, unstable, needing constant emotional support just because she misses her parents too much. And slowly, Ethan began pulling away. Less affection, less eye contact, more siding with his family's version of events. By the end of the 3rd year, Riley was emotionally alone, cut off from friends, disconnected from her family, dependent financially, blamed for everything. And then the final stage began. They attempted to convince Ethan that Riley was mentally unstable, that she imagined things, that she twisted their intentions, that she needed professional help. That was the day Riley snapped out of her silence. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, smartly. She placed her phone under a cushion, pressed record, and walked away. The audio she captured that day is what eventually landed on my desk. And in the next part, I'll tell you how that one recording exposed years of manipulation, and how her in-laws almost turned the entire case against her. When Riley handed me her phone that afternoon in my office, she didn't say a word. She placed it gently on my desk like someone placing fragile evidence, and then she folded her hands together tightly, as if holding herself steady. I tapped on the audio file. It was only 27 minutes long. 27 minutes that would undo 3 years of gaslighting, control, and manipulation. Before I hit play, I looked at her and asked, "Are you ready to hear this again?" She shook her head no, but whispered yes. I pressed play. The recording began with the faint sound of dishes being moved in the kitchen, Margaret's voice first, sharp underneath her polite tone. Then Charles's voice, a calm, calculated, the kind of calm that hides coldness, not peace. And finally Madison, whining, dramatic, playing the victim even in her own home. But what they said next, even I wasn't prepared for. Margaret's voice cut through the speaker like a knife. "If Ethan keeps believing she's stable, he'll never side with us. We need him to think she's too emotional, too fragile, then he'll trust us more than her." Madison chimed in, "She's so gullible. All we have to do is make her doubt herself. She'll break down on her own." And then Charles, with an unsettling calmness, said, "She's dependent on this house now. She has nowhere else to go. If she tries to leave, Ethan will think she's running away because she can't handle the responsibilities." A cold, heavy silence followed. Then Margaret added softly, almost sweetly, "If we keep planting small ideas, Ethan will eventually believe Riley needs help. Once he believes she's unstable, she'll do whatever we want to prove otherwise." The recording ended. I took a slow breath. Even after years of handling emotional abuse cases, manipulation like this still hits a nerve. Riley sat across from me, shoulders rigid, hands trembling, not from fear, but from finally hearing the truth outside her own head. "Claire," she whispered, "I told myself I was imagining it. I thought maybe I really was too sensitive, maybe I misunderstood everything." I shook my head gently. No, they didn't just manipulate you, they built a system around you, and this recording, this is proof of intent. That's rare. Very rare? She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. So, I'm not crazy? No, I said firmly. You were targeted. She broke down quietly, painfully, the way people cry when years of confusion finally have a name. After she steadied her breathing, I explained her options. 1. We could file for emotional abuse and coercive control, something the courts are beginning to take seriously. 2. We could pursue a restraining order if the household environment became unsafe. 3. We could file for a separate residence or request Ethan to move out for the sake of her mental well-being. 4. Or she could confront Ethan with the recording. That last option was the most unpredictable. Men raised under controlling parents often stay loyal to their families, not their spouses. But Riley deserved clarity. She decided she wanted to talk to Ethan, with me guiding her legally. We planned the conversation carefully, step by step. What she would say, what she would not say, how she would handle guilt traps, how she would respond if he got angry or worse, defensive. She left my office with her phone tucked under her arm, determination replacing the fear in her posture. For the first time, she wasn't walking back into that house silently, but what she told me the next morning shook me to my core. Because when she finally confronted Ethan that night, he didn't react the way most victims hope their spouses will. He didn't defend her, he didn't console her, he didn't even look surprised. He said one sentence that froze her blood. I already knew. Riley told me, her legs nearly gave out. She asked him, voice breaking, "You knew and you didn't stop them?" Ethan looked away and said, "They're my family, Riley, they're just trying to help us." Help, that word. That casually delivered dagger. Riley realized in that moment that Ethan wasn't unaware of the manipulation, he was participating in it. Quietly, passively, comfortably, he was benefiting from a system built to keep her small. When she tried to play the recording, Ethan grabbed her phone. He didn't break it, but he held it so tightly she feared he might. He told her, "If you take this outside the house, you'll make things much worse for yourself." That sentence is the anthem of controlling homes. Stay silent, don't expose us, we decide what the truth is. Riley didn't sleep that night. She sat in the bathroom, knees pulled to her chest, replaying everything, not just the recording, but the realization that her own husband had chosen silence over her safety. And the next morning, she came straight back to my office. When she sat down, her voice was steady. Not shaky, not unsure, steady. "Claire," she said, "I want out." And that's when part 2 of this case truly began, because leaving a manipulative family isn't just an emotional battle. It becomes a legal war, a war they were prepared for, a war they thought they would win, but they had no idea what was coming. The day of the hearing arrived with a kind of cold that settles deep into your bones, not from the weather, but from the weight of what's at stake. For Riley, this wasn't just a court date. It was the first time she would stand in a room where the truth finally had a voice louder than Margaret's whispers, Charles's calculations, Madison's theatrics, and Ethan's silence. When she walked into the courtroom beside me, she wasn't trembling like before. Her steps were slow but steady, her chin slightly raised, her hands clasped tightly, not in fear this time, but in determination. 3 years of manipulation had taught her how to hide her pain. Now she was learning how to carry her strength. The Bennetts arrived moments later. Margaret walked in like she was attending a charity auction, graceful, polished, the picture of a caring mother-in-law. She even wore a soft pastel jacket, the kind people choose when they want the world to see them as gentle. Charles looked composed, respectful, hands in his pockets like he had nothing to hide. Madison clung to her purse dramatically, her expression already that of a victim. And Ethan walked in with his head down, avoiding Riley's eyes, standing close enough to his parents to show where his loyalty rested. Their attorney was a man I recognized, sharp, experienced, someone who specialized in turning victims into aggressors. Exactly the kind of lawyer people with something to hide tend to hire. As we took our seats, I leaned slightly toward Riley and whispered, "Whatever happens today, remember the truth is on your side, and the recording is our anchor. They can twist words, but they can't untwist their own voices." She nodded softly, breathing out slowly as the judge entered. The proceedings began with the Bennett's attorney presenting their version of the story, the polished, rehearsed narrative they'd clearly practiced like a script. He painted Riley as unstable, overwhelmed, unable to adjust. He described Margaret as a loving mom who only tried to guide her. He called Charles a steady father figure concerned for the well-being of the couple. He described Madison as a harmless younger sister who felt unfairly shut out. In the most damaging part, he portrayed Ethan as a hardworking husband caught between a sensitive wife and the responsibilities of family life. And then he delivered their central accusation. Your Honor, Mrs. Riley Bennett has been emotionally unstable for months. She created scenarios in her mind, felt persecuted, and recorded private family conversations hoping to twist them into evidence. This case is built on her imagination, not reality. The courtroom fell quiet. All eyes shifted toward Riley. I glanced at her. She didn't flinch. She didn't crumble. She simply stared at the table, jaw tight, shoulders squared. The recording had shown her the truth. Their lies could no longer shake her the way they once did. Finally, it was our turn. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked to the center with a calm, deliberate step, not rushing, not reacting emotionally, but anchoring the court to the seriousness of what was happening. Your Honor, I began, this is not a case about a woman who is unstable. This is a case about a woman who was systematically broken down by a household that wanted control, not partnership. A woman who stayed silent for years, until silence became unsafe. I explained how emotional manipulation often doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves behavioral scars. How coercive control is subtle, invisible, and devastating. How victims begin doubting their own memory, intuition, and sanity long before anyone outside even notices something is wrong. And then, I produced the recording. The courtroom shifted, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The judge adjusted his glasses. The Bennett's attorney froze mid-note. Margaret's polite smile fell off her face like someone had pulled a string. Madison's mouth dropped open. Charles stiffened, and Ethan's expression tightened into dread. I asked the judge for permission to play it. He nodded. I pressed play. The voices echoed through the courtroom, cold, calculated, unmistakable. Margaret. We need him to think she's unstable, then he'll trust us more than her. Madison, she's gullible, she'll break down on her own. Charles, she has nowhere else to go. If she tries to leave, she'll look weak. And then Margaret again, if we keep planting ideas, Ethan will eventually believe Riley needs help. Once he believes she's unstable, she'll do whatever we want. The room went silent, heavy. Truth settling like lead, Margaret's face drained of color. Madison tried to speak, but no words came out. Charles stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Ethan closed his eyes, a long, painful blink. The blink of someone who realized that the world now saw what he helped protect. I turned off the recording and let the silence sit for a moment. Then I spoke. Your Honor, that is not a woman imagining things. That is a woman surviving a home built on psychological manipulation. Riley looked up for the first time. Her eyes were glossy, but not from fear, from validation. For 3 years, she questioned her reality. Today, her reality became undeniable. The judge cleared his throat, his voice firmer than before. I will need time to review this evidence thoroughly, but let me be clear, these statements are deeply concerning. The look on the Bennett's faces said everything. Their narrative had just collapsed. Their control had slipped. Their confidence evaporated. As the hearing adjourned, Margaret avoided everyone's eyes, rushing toward the exit. Madison followed, shaken. Charles left stiffly, as though holding a cracking mask in place. And Ethan hesitated, looked back at Riley, opened his mouth, and then closed it. He walked away without saying a single word. When they were gone, Riley let out a breath she had been holding for years. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble, she simply whispered, "Thank you for believing me." But this wasn't the end. Manipulative families rarely go down quietly, and the Bennetts were already preparing their next move, one that would test Riley's strength in a way she never expected. The moment the Bennetts realized they were losing control and decided to fight dirty. Manipulative families don't just surrender, they rewrite the battlefield. When they can't control the victim privately, they try to control the narrative publicly. And that's exactly what happened next. The morning after the hearing, Riley's phone began lighting up with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Some were relatives she hadn't heard from in years. Others were strangers who had somehow heard things. Every message carried the same tone, fake concern wrapped around subtle accusation. "We're praying for your marriage, sweetheart. Hope you rethink this before you do something you regret. You shouldn't let outside influences ruin your home. Maybe you misunderstood what they said." That one sentence, maybe you misunderstood, is the anthem of manipulators everywhere. It's how they erase the victim's reality piece by piece. Riley stared at her phone in disbelief. She hadn't told a soul outside her attorney and her parents, yet somehow the entire extended family knew. And not the truth, but the version the Bennetts wanted them to know. Within hours, Margaret had transformed herself into the grieving mother-in-law, posting vague quotes online about being hurt by those you love, sending teary voice notes to relatives, calling neighbors and church members, softly implying that Riley recorded them out of malice, not survival. Madison doubled down. She posted on social media, "Pray for our family. Some people twist love into poison." Charles made phone calls too, calm, respectable, calculated, telling everyone that Riley was struggling emotionally and the family had been trying to help her. By noon, the narrative was no longer just twisted, it was weaponized. When Riley arrived at my office, she looked exhausted, not from fear, but from betrayal. "They're telling people I'm mentally unstable," she said, voice tight. "They're calling my relatives, they're telling my cousins I recorded them because I'm paranoid. They're saying Ethan is the real victim." I sighed, already expecting this. "Riley, this is textbook behavior. When manipulators lose control inside the home, they try to isolate the victim outside it." She rubbed her eyes, angry tears shining. "I knew they were bad, Claire. But I didn't think they'd destroy my reputation just to protect their image." I handed her a tissue. "They're not protecting their image, they're protecting their system, and you broke the first wall." But the Bennetts weren't finished. Later that day, their attorney filed an emergency motion claiming that Riley posed a psychological threat to the household. They wanted immediate restrictions placed on her, implying she had violent tendencies, emotional instability, and unpredictable behavior. It was a tactic meant to scare her, to overwhelm her, to make her withdraw the case out of exhaustion. I filed my response within the hour. While preparing the documents, I asked Riley, "Has Ethan contacted you?" She shook her head. "Not once, not a message, not even to ask if I'm okay." Her voice cracked a little. "He's letting them do all this, Claire. He's watching them tear me apart and he's silent." Silence from a spouse is not neutrality. Silence is alignment. But the worst blow came 2 days later. A distant aunt, someone Riley barely knew, forwarded her a voice note that had been circulating privately among relatives. It was Margaret's voice. Soft, controlled, practiced. "She's not well," Margaret said tearfully. "We've tried everything to help her. Poor Ethan, he's going through so much. Riley needs support, not confrontation. We're only trying to save the marriage." Save the marriage. Another phrase used to suffocate victims into silence. When Riley played that voice note for me, the pain on her face wasn't just hurt, it was humiliation. The kind that hits deeper than any insult because it attacks your truth. I leaned forward and said firmly, "Riley, listen to me. If they're resorting to public manipulation, it means you've hit a nerve. They're afraid. People don't go this far unless the truth threatens them." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something stronger than sorrow. "Resolve, they won't break me again," she whispered. "I can't let them." But then something unexpected happened. A message appeared on Riley's phone from Ethan, 3 words, "We need to talk." Her heart pounded. Not because she wanted reconciliation, but because the timing was too perfect, too strategic, too aligned with the Bennett's narrative campaign. She looked at me, fear and anger tangled together. What if he tries to talk me out of this? What if he pressures me? I studied the message. "Riley, if he truly cared, he would have come to you after hearing the recording. He didn't. He's coming now when his family's losing control." She swallowed. "So what do I do?" "You don't go alone," I said, "and you go without expectations." We agreed on a neutral public place for the meeting, a cafe, bright, open, safe. But what Ethan told her there, what he tried to negotiate, what he asked her to do, became the turning point of the entire case. A moment that revealed exactly who he was behind every silence, every avoidance, every excuse. The cafe was warm, filled with quiet music and the soft hum of conversations, the kind of place where people come to reconnect, to breathe, to feel safe. But for Riley, it felt like a battlefield disguised as a coffee shop. She sat at a small corner table where I could see her clearly from my own seat across the room. I wasn't part of the conversation that would make Ethan defensive, but I made sure she wasn't alone. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. The steam rose gently, but her expression stayed frozen. At exactly 6:05, Ethan walked in. For a moment, he paused near the door like someone rehearsing a role before stepping onto a stage. Then he walked toward her with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He sat down, cleared his throat, and said, "Riley, you didn't have to make things this big." That sentence. That soft, guilty, minimizing sentence, it told me everything about his intentions. Riley stayed silent. She had planned not to fill his silence, not to comfort him, not to shrink. Ethan continued, "My parents are hurt. They don't deserve this. You could have come to me instead of dragging them into court." Riley looked at him, really looked. This was the man she once thought would protect her. Now he was protecting the people who had broken her. Quietly, she said, "I tried coming to you for years." Ethan leaned back, annoyed. "You overreacted. That recording, you blew it out of context." They were frustrated. Parents get frustrated. "You know how families are." He was rewriting the truth right in front of her. Riley took a breath. "You heard what they said. They were planning to make you think I'm unstable." Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead dramatically. "They didn't mean it literally, Riley. You take everything so personally. You're emotional, that's the real issue here." There it was again. The familiar knife disguised as concern. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, we can fix this. But only if you drop the case, withdraw everything, apologize to my parents, promise them you didn't mean to hurt them." She blinked, slowly processing the absurdity. "Apologize to them?" "Yes," he said. "For recording them, for embarrassing the family, for insulting them in court." Riley stared at him with an emptiness that comes only after heartbreak has burned through every layer of hope. "But they abused me," she whispered. "They isolated me, they lied to you about me, they broke me, and you let them?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it, he didn't defend her, he didn't even flinch. He simply folded his arms and said, "They're my parents. I'm never choosing you over them." The words hit like a physical blow. Not because she wanted him to choose, but because she finally heard the truth he had always avoided saying out loud. For years, she wondered why he never stood up for her, why he stayed silent, why he watched her drown. Now she knew he was never torn, he was never conflicted, he was never trapped between two sides. He had always chosen his family, he had just expected her to accept it quietly. Ethan leaned forward again, this time in a lower, sharper tone. "If you continue this case, you're destroying our marriage. You're making me look like a bad husband, and I'm telling you right now, if you go through with it, we're done." He said it as a threat, not a heartbreak, not a confession, a weapon. Riley's lips parted slightly, not in shock, but in realization. She saw him clearly for the first time. The man behind the silence. The man behind the compliance. The man behind every moment she felt alone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry, she didn't plead. Instead, she asked him one simple, devastating question. "Ethan, when was the last time you asked if I was happy?" He opened his mouth. No answer came out. She continued, "When was the last time you defended me, or believed me, or even listened to me without your parents in the room?" Ethan looked away, jaw clenching, eyes flashing with annoyance because deep down he knew the truth. "Not once, not ever." Riley stood up slowly, her voice steady, her hands no longer trembling. "That recording wasn't just evidence, Ethan, it was clarity, and now I have mine." He grabbed her wrist lightly, not hard, but controlling enough. "Think carefully, Riley. If you walk away now, it's over." She pulled her hand back, gently but firmly. "It's been over for a long time, you just didn't notice." And with that, she walked out of the cafe, not fast, not shaken, but with the quiet dignity of a woman finally choosing herself. When she stepped outside, I caught up beside her. She didn't have to explain what happened. Her expression said everything. The marriage had ended long before the legal case ever began. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She looked up at the sky, a calm, steady look, and answered, "For the first time in years, I think I might be." But just as we began preparing for the final phase of the case, something happened, something neither of us expected. A new piece of evidence surfaced. A message, a screenshot, a truth that would expose the Bennetts far deeper than the recording ever did. Some cases move forward slowly. This one turned on a dime with a single screenshot. 3 days after Riley ended things with Ethan in that cafe, my office phone rang. It was early, the building still quiet, sunlight barely breaking through my blinds. Riley's voice came through the line, shaky but urgent. "Claire, someone sent me something, you need to see it." 20 minutes later, she rushed into my office, breath uneven, clutching her phone like it was burning her hand. Without a word, she placed it in front of me. A message, one screenshot, sent anonymously. At first glance, it looked like a regular group chat: Margaret, Charles, Madison, and Ethan. But it was the conversation that made my stomach turn. Madison had written, "Did Riley take the bait yet?" Margaret replied, "She must be confused by now. Keep acting emotional. She'll break soon." Charles added, "The key is getting Ethan to push the apology. Once she apologizes, she'll stop the case out of guilt." And then Ethan, who had looked Riley in the eyes and pretended he was trying to save their marriage, Ethan, who had claimed he was stuck in the middle, Ethan, who said he didn't want things to get worse, had typed the sentence that shattered whatever illusion remained. "Don't worry, I'll make her drop the case. She's scared. I can control this." Control, that word again, the Bennett family anthem. Riley let out a shaky breath, her hands tightening into fists. Her face wasn't sad. She wasn't crying. She wasn't broken. She was angry. A deep, righteous anger, the kind that comes when the truth finally aligns every piece of betrayal into one clear picture. I stared at the screenshot for a long moment. "Riley, this is huge," she nodded silently. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "He never loved me, Claire. He loved controlling me just like them." I reached across the desk gently. "This isn't your failure. This is their exposure." But the situation sparked a new question: who sent the screenshot? Who in the Bennett family circle had finally seen enough? It didn't take long to find out. Later that afternoon, a message came to my office email from an unrecognized name: Lydia Bennett, Charles's sister, Ethan's aunt. Her message was short, hesitant, but clear. "I've watched Margaret manipulate this family for years. Riley doesn't deserve what they're doing to her. I am sending this anonymously, but I support the truth." Then she added one more line: "There's more if needed." More, the kind of word that makes attorneys sit up straighter. But even without additional files, the single screenshot was enough to shift the entire legal landscape. This was proof of conspiracy, not emotional frustration, not misunderstanding, not family conflict. A planned, coordinated effort to manipulate Riley into dropping a legal case. A tactic that could classify as coercive control, witness tampering, and psychological intimidation. I looked at Riley. "Are you ready for this next phase? Because once we file this, everything escalates." Her answer was immediate. "Yes, I'm ready. I'm done being afraid." We drafted a supplemental filing for the court, attaching the screenshot as new evidence. We argued that this group chat confirmed intentional emotional manipulation. Ethan participated knowingly in coercive behavior. The in-laws attempted to obstruct legal proceedings. Riley's fear was legitimate and supported by direct proof. But we weren't the only ones preparing. The moment the Bennetts learned that new evidence had been submitted, the entire family went into panic mode. Their attorney called mine before the ink was even dry on the paperwork. "Is this really necessary?" he asked cautiously. His tone was no longer arrogant. It was worried. When controlling families lose the narrative, they don't apologize. They panic, but the real shock came during our next courtroom appearance. The judge entered with a sternness I hadn't seen before, paperwork in his hand, glasses low on his nose. He looked at the Bennett's attorney and said, "These new messages are extremely troubling. They suggest intentional manipulation of the plaintiff and potential obstruction of this court's process." Margaret stiffened, color draining from her face. Madison's eyes widened in disbelief. Charles looked like someone had punched the air out of him. And Ethan just stared at the table. He didn't fight, he didn't defend, he didn't speak. His silence wasn't loyalty anymore, it was defeat. The judge turned to me. "Miss Morgan, I'll be reviewing this evidence thoroughly. In the meantime, Riley Bennett is granted temporary independent residence and protection from direct contact unless mediated by counsel." Riley exhaled sharply, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It was the first legal win that directly protected her. Margaret tried to speak, tried to rise, but her attorney pulled her sleeve gently, shaking his head. They knew they were cornered. Outside the courtroom, as Riley and I walked down the hallway, she finally said what she had held in for years. "I'm not going back to that house, not even for closure." I nodded, proud of her strength. "You're not. And you won't be forced to, not now, not ever." But the case wasn't finished. There was still the final hearing, the decision that would either free Riley completely or give the Bennetts one last chance to claw back control. Some endings arrive quietly. This one arrived like a final storm, loud, revealing, cleansing. The courtroom was packed, not with spectators but with tension. The kind that sits heavy in the air because every person in the room knows something irreversible is about to happen. Riley walked beside me, dressed in a soft beige coat, hair tied simply, no makeup except a touch of mascara, not to impress, not to look strong, but because she finally no longer lived for other people's approval. Across the room, the Bennetts sat together like a fractured statue. Margaret's face was drained, her usual composure replaced by something unfamiliar, fear. Madison clung to her bag, eyes darting around. Charles looked older, like the structure he built for decades had finally cracked. And Ethan looked nothing like a husband fighting for his marriage. He looked like a man realizing the weight of the truth he had just been crushed beneath. The judge began speaking. His voice was steady, not cold, not emotional, but deeply serious. The evidence presented in this case reveals a disturbing pattern of coercive control, manipulation, and intentional psychological harm. Every word echoed like a hammer. He continued, "This court does not tolerate environments where a spouse is isolated, intimidated, or subjected to strategic emotional abuse." Margaret shifted in her seat. Charles lowered his eyes. Madison swallowed hard. The judge lifted the printed screenshot, the one that had shattered the Bennett family's narrative, and looked directly at them. The coordinated effort to manipulate the plaintiff into withdrawing this case is especially troubling. The room held its breath. Therefore, the judge said, the court rules in favor of Riley Bennett. Riley closed her eyes, not in relief but in release, like a bird feeling sunlight after years of darkness. The judge continued, Mrs. Bennett is granted full protection from further contact or harassment from the defendants. She is also granted immediate separation, independent residence, and legal autonomy. Any attempt to intimidate or manipulate her moving forward will result in severe consequences. Then he looked directly at Ethan. As for you, Mr. Bennett, Ethan's shoulders tensed. This was the moment he could no longer hide behind silence. Your participation in these acts, both by omission and intentional involvement, is documented. The court will not compel reconciliation. Instead, you are advised to seek counsel and reflect deeply on the responsibilities you failed to uphold. Ethan nodded, barely, like someone absorbing a blow he knew he deserved. The judge then looked at Riley. You showed extraordinary courage coming forward. This court commends your strength. She whispered, thank you, her voice breaking for the first time that day. And with that, the judge adjourned the hearing. But the story wasn't finished, not until the hallway moment. As we gathered Riley's documents, Margaret suddenly stood up, shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. She hurried toward Riley despite her attorney trying to stop her. Riley, she snapped, voice sharp but trembling. You ruined this family, you destroyed everything we built. Riley froze, not in fear but in shock at Margaret's audacity. I stepped slightly in front of her, prepared to intervene, but Riley gently touched my arm. No, she whispered. Let me handle this. She stepped forward, her voice calm, steady, controlled, everything Margaret never was. I didn't destroy your family, Riley said quietly. I just stopped letting you destroy me. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her without fear, and it disarmed her completely. Riley continued, you didn't lose control today. You lost someone you never deserved. Margaret's eyes glistened with anger, not regret, and she stormed away, heels clicking loudly down the hallway. Charles followed silently, avoiding eye contact. Madison hurried behind them, muttering about how none of this was fair, and Ethan, he stayed. He walked slowly toward Riley, stopping a few feet away. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defensive. He looked broken. Riley, he said softly, I never meant for things to go this far. She studied him, not with love, not with longing, but with clarity. Ethan, she replied, you never meant for anything. That was the problem? He swallowed hard. I thought you'd understand that it was just family dynamics. Riley shook her head gently. No, it was abuse, and you let it happen. Her voice didn't crack, his did. I'm sorry, he whispered. Riley held his gaze one last time. I hope you learned something from this, but your apology doesn't rebuild what you let break. Ethan wiped his eyes quickly and turned away, defeated. As we stepped outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Not dramatically, not symbolically, just enough to warm the air around us. Riley inhaled deeply, for the first time in years without the weight of expectation crushing her lungs. She looked at me and smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Claire, I feel free." I nodded. "You are? And what now?" she asked softly. "Now," I said, "you go build a life where your voice isn't monitored, where your worth isn't measured by someone else's mood, where you get to exist fully, freely, without fear." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight touch her face. And when she opened them again, the woman standing there wasn't the Riley who came into my office months ago, trembling, doubting, apologizing for her own existence. She was someone new, someone whole. Someone who survived a house built on manipulation and walked out stronger. This case closed. A story of breaking free. A reminder that emotional abuse leaves invisible scars but strength leaves visible light. Thank you for staying through the journey.